My mom gave my bully a $500 gift card for being patient with me. He smirked and mockingly said, "You should thank me too." I froze in front of everyone until he slipped me a note. "Read it when you're alone," it said. My hand shook as I opened it. So, this happened a few weeks ago and I'm still trying to process it all. My mom invited some kids from school over for dinner, and one of them is my biggest bully, Derek Parker. He's tormented me for years, and for some reason, my mom decided to give him a $500 gift card for being patient with me. I froze when he mocked me in front of everyone. But here's where it gets weird. After dinner, Derek slipped me a note. It said, "Read it when you're alone." When I opened it, I couldn't believe what I saw. I'm not sure what to make of it, but it's been eating at me ever since. I wish I could say that I was used to the way people treated me, but I wasn't. My name is Natalie Foster, and I've always been the quiet, awkward girl at school. Most of my classmates didn't seem to notice me unless they were making fun of me. I could handle some teasing, who doesn't? But then there was Derek. Derek Parker was the kind of guy who could make your worst fears feel real. He didn't just call me names or laugh when I tripped. He orchestrated elaborate pranks, pushed me in the halls, and made sure everyone else knew it. The worst part was that he always had a smirk on his face, like he knew he could do whatever he wanted without consequences. I hated him. It was the summer before my senior year, and I had just about enough of high school. But I didn't think things would get any worse. That's when my mom, bless her heart, decided to throw a dinner party. She wasn't doing it to be cruel, but because she thought it would help me make connections. Apparently, she felt that if I just spent more time with my classmates, I'd eventually find my confidence. And so, she invited Derek Parker. It wasn't just an invitation. She was insistent. My mom had this unrealistic optimism about people. She thought that kindness would change anyone. She had no idea about the things Derek had done to me. She couldn't see it. To her, he was just another boy who maybe just didn't know how to connect or whatever explanation she had. And so, there we were, sitting across from each other at the dinner table. The tension in the air was almost unbearable. Derek was leaning back in his chair, his eyes scanning the room like he owned the place. I could feel my pulse quicken as my mom tried to make small talk, acting like everything was perfectly normal. But I knew this wasn't normal. This wasn't some friendly gathering, this was my nightmare being made real in front of my face. My mom, ever the peacemaker, was genuinely trying to compliment Derek for being so patient with me over the years. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Natalie can be a little difficult sometimes," my mom said, looking at me with a smile that I knew wasn't real. "But I really appreciate you being so patient with her, Derek. You've been so understanding." It was like someone had just slammed a door in my face. The words stung more than they should have, and the room suddenly felt too small. My mom didn't know. She didn't know the half of it. Derek's face lit up with that insufferable grin. "Yeah, you should thank me too," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The others at the table chuckled, but my stomach dropped. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. My throat was tight, and I felt heat rushing to my face. I wanted to get up, to shout, to make my mom understand. But the words wouldn't come. How could I explain years of torment in a few minutes? How could I show her what Derek had done? He was sitting there, acting like the hero of the story, while I was the one who had been trapped in it all along. Dinner went on, but I couldn't focus on anything other than the humiliation I felt. My mom continued to chat with Derek, praising him, not even noticing how he was making me feel smaller and smaller with every word. Then, just as everyone was getting up to leave, Derek did something that I never saw coming. He leaned over to me, his face close enough that I could smell the faint scent of his cologne. I tensed up, unsure of what to expect. "You know, you should really be grateful," he muttered, barely above a whisper. "I could have made things a lot worse for you, but I didn't. You're lucky I've been so patient." The words hit me like a slap in the face. I felt my chest tighten, my vision blurring. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to tell him that I didn't need his patience, that I didn't want it. But before I could even gather myself to react, he slipped something onto my plate. It was small, just a folded piece of paper. He stood up, nodded to my mom, and walked out without another word. The moment I was alone, I unfolded the note. I never wanted to be like this. You don't know what it's like to feel powerless. My dad's always pushing me, telling me I'm not enough. I thought if I was the one in control, maybe I could fix that. I don't know how you saw through me, but I can't keep doing this. I'm sorry. My hand shook as I read the note over and over, trying to understand what Derek had just written. This wasn't the Derek I knew. This wasn't the arrogant, cruel bully who'd made my life hell for years. This was someone else. Someone who was asking for forgiveness, or at least for understanding. But how could I understand him? How could I just let everything go after all he'd done? I couldn't make sense of it. I still can't. The next day at school, Derek didn't look at me the same way. He didn't smirk or whisper cruel things behind my back. Instead, he stayed quiet, distant. I watched him from across the hall between classes. He wasn't the same. It was like something had shifted. But there was still something unsettling about it. It felt too normal. Too sudden. I wanted to ask him what this all meant. Why he wrote the note. Why he had been so cruel for so long. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction. And yet, something inside of me wanted to know more. What happened to make him this way? What was going on in his life that made him treat me, and others, like that? A few days later, I saw Derek again. He caught my eye as I walked through the hall. I wasn't sure whether he was looking at me with guilt or just indifference, but there was something different about the way he moved around me now. It was like he was no longer trying to hurt me. It was like he was trying to erase all the things he'd done, without actually saying a word. I don't know if he'll ever truly apologize. I don't know if he even means it. But that note, it was something I'll never forget. And it made me realize that people, even bullies, are complicated. Maybe Derek wasn't just a villain in my story. Maybe he was the product of something bigger, something I didn't fully understand. As for my mom, she still doesn't know the whole story. I've never told her what really went down that night. I'm not sure if I ever will. But somehow, I think she's starting to see things differently. Maybe it's not just me who needs to change. And maybe, just maybe, it's not too late for Derek to change either. The days after the dinner dragged on, each one feeling like I was walking through a fog. School had resumed, and despite it being the start of my senior year, it felt like I was stuck in a loop, trapped in the same place, surrounded by the same people, yet everything felt different. Derek had stopped bullying me, but I couldn't quite figure out why. Was he feeling guilty? Was it just a phase? Was this some kind of twisted game to him? The thing was, it wasn't just Derek's behavior that changed, it was mine too. I couldn't stop thinking about that note. I never wanted to be like this. You don't know what it's like to feel powerless. I'd read it over and over, each time hoping to find something I missed, something that would help me understand. It was like Derek had opened a door into a world I hadn't even considered. For years, I had seen him as the enemy, someone who took pleasure in my pain. But now, I saw him differently. I saw the cracks in the walls he'd built around himself. That morning, as I walked into the cafeteria, I spotted Derek sitting with his usual group of friends. They weren't exactly friends, they were more like an entourage, and Derek was always the one calling the shots. His friends laughed at his jokes, hung on every word, but there was something in his eyes that day that unsettled me. He was staring at me again, that same unreadable expression on his face. It wasn't mocking. It wasn't angry. It was almost neutral. I sat down at my usual table, the one in the corner of the cafeteria where I could watch everyone without being noticed. I was just about to take a bite of my sandwich when I felt a presence next to me. I looked up to see Derek standing there, looking at me like he was weighing something in his mind. "Can I sit?" he asked, his voice low. I almost choked on my sandwich. What was happening? Why was he asking me if he could sit down? After everything, after years of bullying, after all the hurt, Derek Parker, my bully, was asking me if he could sit at my table? I didn't know how to respond at first. I was caught completely off guard. Sure, I finally muttered, unsure whether I was dreaming or if this was some cruel prank. He nodded and sat down across from me, a strange silence falling between us. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to ask him about the note, to demand answers. But another part of me just wanted to pretend everything was normal, like we could pretend the past didn't happen. I didn't know if I was ready for that conversation. For a moment, we sat there, both of us just eating in silence. The rest of the cafeteria buzzed around us, people laughing, talking, going about their usual routines. It felt like a dream. Finally, Derek spoke, his voice quieter than usual. "I meant what I wrote," he said, glancing up at me. I looked at him, trying to read his face. His words were almost too simple, too sincere to be true. But something in the way he said it, the lack of his usual cocky attitude, the absence of a smirk, made me want to believe him. "I know," I said, and I realized I meant it. I didn't fully understand it, but I knew he was being honest in his own way. Maybe I could never fully forgive him for everything he had done, but in that moment, I understood that there was something more to him than the bully I had known. Derek nodded, like he was relieved by my response, though it seemed like he still had more he wanted to say. But before he could speak, one of his friends, Jared, came over and slapped him on the back. "Hey, man, what are you doing over here?" Jared laughed, a little too loudly. "Aren't you supposed to be with the guys?" Derek gave him a quick glance before answering, "I'm fine." Jared seemed to notice something was off, but didn't press further. He raised an eyebrow and turned to walk away, muttering something about needing to catch up with the rest of the group. I watched as Derek seemed to shrink a little in his seat, the confident posture he usually had gone. It was strange. He wasn't the Derek Parker I had known. This guy was someone else entirely. After Jared left, there was another long silence between us. I wanted to ask him what had happened. What had changed? Why was he sitting here, pretending like everything was fine between us? But I couldn't. The words felt stuck in my throat. "You don't have to forgive me," Derek finally said, breaking the silence. "I don't expect that. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. For everything. I've been a jerk for so long, and I don't know why I did it. I guess I was just angry? At everything." I stared at him, trying to absorb what he was saying. His voice was small, almost as if he was speaking to himself more than me. "You don't have to explain," I said quietly, though a part of me wished he would. I still didn't understand why he'd treated me like that for so long. But I realized I didn't need him to explain. What mattered now was how we both moved forward. I didn't want to be stuck in the past. He didn't say anything for a while, and I didn't either. The whole situation was surreal, like we were both stuck between two worlds. One where I was the victim, and one where he was the bully. And now, for some reason, we were both trying to figure out how to live in this new world where things weren't as black and white as they used to be. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. Derek stood up, as if he had made his decision, and I was left sitting there, alone with my thoughts. I didn't know if things would ever be the same between us. Maybe this was just some phase he was going through, or maybe he genuinely wanted to make amends. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel that weight in my chest when I saw him. I didn't feel the sting of hatred or resentment. For the first time, I felt free. But then came the questions. What did this mean for me? What did this mean for the rest of my high school life? Could I really move past everything? Could I let go of the anger, or would I always remember the way Derek had made me feel? And what about my mom? She still had no idea what had really been going on. She still saw Derek as this nice, misunderstood kid. She had no idea about the years of cruelty I had endured. I didn't know if I was ready to tell her. In fact, I wasn't sure I ever would. The rest of the day felt strange. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed, but nothing had truly been resolved. Derek's apology, if you could even call it that, had opened a door I wasn't sure I was ready to walk through. I found myself asking questions that I didn't have answers to. What did it mean to forgive someone who had hurt you so badly? Was forgiveness even possible? Was it enough just to understand why someone did what they did? As I left school that day, I felt more confused than ever. But one thing was clear, the story I thought I knew was no longer the one I was living. I wasn't sure what would come next, but I knew that the past wasn't going to be the thing that defined me anymore. The next few weeks passed in a strange, quiet rhythm. School was still the same in many ways, cliques, the same old gossip, the quiet hum of high school drama, but for me, it felt different. I wasn't the same girl who had just endured the endless bullying. Something had shifted, not just in Derek, but in me. I kept thinking about that lunch, about Derek sitting across from me and apologizing in his own, strange way. I didn't forgive him, not fully, but it was clear that he was trying. And that, in itself, was something. Something that I never thought I would see. But that didn't mean I was ready to forget. I had always been the quiet girl who just took the insults, took the jokes, took the side glances. But now I realized I didn't have to be that person anymore. I had been carrying around this weight of resentment, but it was starting to feel like it was time to let go. Still, there was a part of me that couldn't shake the feeling that Derek had been playing some kind of game. I wasn't ready to trust him, but I knew I had to confront the situation head-on. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. The first step came a week after our strange lunch. Derek came up to me again, this time in the hallway after class. He didn't sit with me, didn't try to have a conversation, but he waited for me to pass. His eyes caught mine, and for a split second, I saw something in them, something vulnerable. Something almost scared? "Natalie," he said, his voice softer than I expected. I just wanted to apologize again. I know it's not enough, but I don't know how else to say it." I stopped walking. The tension between us was thick, like a silent war that neither of us was ready to win or lose. I was torn, part of me wanted to say, "It's fine," and move on. But another part of me, the one that had spent years being silenced, wanted to stand up and demand the truth. "I appreciate the apology, Derek," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was beating fast. "But you can't just expect me to forget everything that happened. You hurt me. You hurt me and everyone else you picked on." He flinched slightly, as if my words had hit him harder than he'd expected. But instead of defending himself, he nodded, looking down at his shoes. "I know," he muttered. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I do want to make things right. I don't know how." I studied him for a moment. It wasn't the apology I had imagined for years. It wasn't grand or dramatic. But it was real. I could see the shift in him. He wasn't the same boy who had tormented me for so long. But could I trust that? I shook my head. "You can start by not pretending everything's fine. You don't get to just waltz into my life and think I'm going to welcome you with open arms because you gave me a $500 gift card or wrote me a note. This isn't some fairy tale where you magically get redeemed. Actions speak louder than words, Derek." He was silent for a long moment, looking at the floor. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Fair enough," he said. "I'll prove it to you. I'll show you I'm not that guy anymore." It was the first time he had really acknowledged what he had done to me. I wasn't sure if that made me feel better, but it felt like something had finally clicked. The next few days were interesting. Derek didn't make any more attempts to get close to me, but he also didn't bully me. In fact, he seemed to make an effort to avoid the crowd that used to encourage his behavior. I noticed him stepping away from his old friends, his so-called entourage. He wasn't seeking out attention anymore, he wasn't trying to be the loudest person in the room. But what really changed was how other people reacted. It wasn't just Derek who had been a bully, it had been his entire circle. For years, I had been the target of their jokes, their pranks, their cruelty. And now that Derek was backing off, the others were unsure of what to do. One day, during a particularly tense group project, I found myself in a situation I hadn't expected. I was paired with some of Derek's old friends, Jared, Caleb, and Vanessa. They had always been a part of the bullying, either by joining in or turning a blind eye. But this time, things were different. Jared, who had once mocked me for my quiet nature, looked at me with a mix of uncertainty and, for the first time, respect. "You don't mind if we work together, do you?" he asked, his tone almost cautious. I blinked at him, surprised by the change in his demeanor. This wasn't the Jared I knew. He wasn't laughing, wasn't making snide comments under his breath. He was acting like I was just another classmate. "No, I don't mind," I replied, keeping my voice steady. I didn't want to get my hopes up, but there was something here I hadn't seen before. And then it hit me, the dynamic had shifted. Derek wasn't the leader of the pack anymore. The others, Jared, Caleb, Vanessa, were trying to figure out where they fit now that the hierarchy had crumbled. Without Derek's dominance, they were left to either follow his lead or find their own paths. And, for the first time, they were looking at me, not with contempt, but with neutrality. As the days passed, something even stranger happened. I started hearing less and less from the people who had once been part of Derek's inner circle. Vanessa, who had been one of the worst, started showing up to class on time and actually doing the work. Caleb, the silent one who had never bothered to stand up for anyone, started speaking to me like a regular person. Jared, who had been the loudest in making fun of me, began asking for my input in group activities. It was like Derek's shift had triggered a chain reaction. He wasn't the leader anymore. I wasn't sure if it was his apology or just the fact that everyone had finally realized the toxicity of the way they had been acting, but people stopped laughing at my expense. They stopped making jokes at my cost. And then came the real payoff, the thing I had been waiting for, not in anger, but in the quiet satisfaction of seeing the tables finally turn. During the final month of the school year, as the yearbook was being passed around for signatures, I found something that felt like sweet, unexpected justice. Derek Parker, the guy who had once tried to ruin my high school experience, had written something in my yearbook. But it wasn't a simple, "sorry for being a jerk." It wasn't a half-hearted comment trying to make up for years of torment. It was a message that said, "You were stronger than I gave you credit for. I messed up, but I'm glad I got to see who you really are. You were never the problem. I was." I closed the yearbook, staring at the page, my hands trembling. It wasn't the apology I had wanted. It wasn't the kind of closure I thought I needed. But it was something. Derek wasn't perfect. He wasn't going to be my best friend, and he wasn't going to make up for everything he had done. But in that one moment, he did something I never thought would happen. He admitted his mistakes. And that, in itself, was a victory. And as for me? I had my own quiet victory. I had survived. I had kept my dignity. I had come out the other side of high school stronger and more resilient than ever before. I had finally taken control of my story. And that, in the end, was the sweetest revenge of all.